All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating historical puzzle, one that's tucked right inside the pages of the Bible. We're talking about a 70-year mystery. It's a story of prophecy and, well, what looks like a bunch of contradictions that, once you untangle them, reveals something so much deeper.
So here's the big question we're asking in this explainer. Is this ancient 70-year prophecy just a dusty piece of history? Or could it actually be a pattern, a warning that echoes into our own time? We're going to tackle this in two parts. First, we'll put on our detective hats and solve the historical puzzle. Then, we'll get into its incredible symbolic meaning.
Okay, so let's dive right in. To really get a handle on this mystery, we have to start with the famous prophecy that kind of sets the stage for everything else. And here it is, straight from the prophet Jeremiah. It says, "The land will be desolate, and the people will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. 70, exactly. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, that's what you'd think. But when you actually try to line up the historical records from the Bible itself, things start to get, well, a little messy.
Okay, so this is where we get to the real head-scratcher. This is where you can see how different books of the Bible talking about the very same events seem to give us totally different dates.
So let's take a look at the third and final exile. This was the most devastating one, when Jerusalem was totally destroyed. Jeremiah's account says it happened in the 18th year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. But if you flip over to the book of 2 Kings, it says it happened in his 19th year. So, what gives? An 18th year, a 19th year, for the exact same event. How's that even possible?
And get this, it wasn't just a one-time typo. The same exact problem pops up for the very first exile. The book of Daniel says it all started in the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim, but Jeremiah connects that same period to Jehoiakim's 4th year. You see the problem? With these kinds of discrepancies at the beginning and the end of the story, trying to calculate a precise 70-year timeline seems pretty much impossible.
So, how in the world do we make sense of this? I mean, it really feels like a major contradiction. But the solution isn't about finding an error. It's about understanding how people in the ancient world actually recorded history in the first place.
And the first huge clue is this concept of the regnal year. Now, this was just the system they used for counting the years of a king's rule. But here's the catch. There wasn't one single way to do it. Some kingdoms, they'd start the clock the moment a new king took the throne. But other kingdoms would wait until the king's first full calendar year in power to start counting year one. That difference alone can easily create a one-year offset in the records.
So, it really all boils down to two key things. First, like we just saw, you had these different calendar systems between places like Judah and Babylon. And second, you have to remember these events weren't just single-day affairs. A military siege, for example, could start in the autumn of one year and not actually wrap up until the spring of the next. So one historian might record the start date and another records the end date. And guess what? They're both telling the truth. These aren't contradictions, they're just artifacts of how ancient record-keeping worked.
All right, we've got our clues. The different regnal years, the long-term nature of events. So now, let's put it all together and build one single, coherent timeline and see how this all fits so brilliantly.
So, here it is, the unified sequence of events. Everything kicks off in 606 BC with the first wave of exiles, which actually included the prophet Daniel. This is the crucial moment, the start of our 70-year clock. Then there was a second exile around 599 BC, and that one took the prophet Ezekiel. And then came the final, crushing blow in 588 BC, when the city and its temple were just completely leveled. The clock finally stops ticking decades later, around 537 or 536 BC, when the new guy in charge of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, issues this amazing decree basically saying, "You can all go home."
Okay, so here's the million-dollar question. Does this new unified timeline actually add up to 70 years? I mean, did Jeremiah's wild prophecy actually come true? Let's do the math.
We've got our start line and our finish line. The start point is that very first exile, which, depending on exactly how you work out the ancient calendars, lands in either 607 or 606 BC. And the end point is that incredible moment when the desolation is officially over, all marked by that famous decree from Cyrus the Great.
And get this, it works perfectly no matter which way you slice it. Check it out. If you start the count in 607 BC and you end it in 537 BC with Cyrus's big decree, you get exactly 70 years.
Or if you start in 606 BC and you end it in 536 BC, which is when they actually laid the foundation for the new temple, you also get exactly 70 years. Both historical models, both totally plausible, and both fulfill the prophecy. To the year.
So the math checks out perfectly. But here's where things get really fascinating. This isn't just about ancient history and math problems. The entire story, the captivity, the 70-year timeline, all of it is a powerful symbol. It's pointing to something else entirely.
And to get what that is, you have to jump forward hundreds of years to the New Testament book of Revelation. Look at the language here, a call for people to come out of a sinful entity to avoid judgment. That phrase, come out of her, that should sound really familiar because this is where the historical story of Babylon becomes a prophetic one.
You see, the source material explains that the Bible gives us a tale of two Babylons. On one hand, you have the historical Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar, a real place, bricks and mortar, an actual empire that held people captive for 70 years. But then you have this symbolic Great Babylon from the book of Revelation. And this isn't a literal city. It's a symbol for all the world's systems, political, economic, you name it, that stand against God.
And check out how this pattern plays out. Remember the story of Nebuchadnezzar building that giant golden statue and forcing everyone to worship it? Well, this is a direct parallel to prophecies of a future image of the beast that will demand the same kind of forced worship. The incredible act of faith from those few guys who refused to bow down in ancient Babylon is presented as a model, like a blueprint, for how believers are supposed to act during a future time of intense pressure. So we end up right back where we started, but now with a totally new perspective. The 70-year mystery is solved, sure, but it leaves us with a much, much bigger question. If this ancient story of captivity and faithfulness and freedom is a pattern, what does this ancient history warn us about today? What modern-day Babylons might we be called to come out of? That's really something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.